Employers of Reddit, what has been your most awkward interview for a new employee ever? I was phone screening an art candidate for a video game project. The recruiter had sent me a fine looking resume, which included 10 years of modeling, texturing, rigging, and animating experience. On his website he had some pretty good dragon type creatures, so I called him up. I started the interview by asking the candidate about the last project he worked on. He said he made wyverns for the game Second Life. I asked him to tell me about that project. He proceeded to excitedly launch into a description of the different types of wyverns and their relationships to each other in wyvern society. Apparently one wyvern named Bob was a jerk until you get to know him, but his wyvern lover was very friendly and outgoing. I explained that I wanted to know about his last job. Could he talk about his artistic process or what he learned or what he would want to do differently on a future project? But the candidate couldn't seem to switch away from explaining his wyvern characters. He kept going on about all their backstories. I eventually got him to explain that all his projects over the past 10 years related exclusively to these wyvern Second Life characters. When I verified that he had never worked as an employee for a paying company, he explained that he hated corporations and would never agree to work for one. I told him that this interview was for a job as an artist at a corporation. He proceeded to politely tell me he was no longer interested. Well, that was interesting. Me. Do you want a glass of water? Applicant. Yes. Me. Frick, I don't have one. Awkward silence followed by, so tell me about yourself. Not currently an employer, but I managed an arcade for a year. Did a Skype interview for one of our locations that wasn't nearby to me, so it was easier to use Skype than drive out for interviews with high school kids. I swear this guy was playing games on his computer, clicking almost non-stop, looking around his screen, etc. Only asked about half my questions, didn't call him back. This reminded me of a situation I experienced this year. I was laid off by the company I worked for and was trying to back into the workforce. Early 20s BTW. I applied for a management position at GameStop. I had 4 years of management experience at McDonald's. They called me back and offered me minimum wage at 4 hours a week. NKT sure why this comment reminded of this, but it did. I was a GM for a Chick-fil-A for a while. 19-year-old kid walks into the restaurant for an interview. He seems nice enough and the interview was good, so I offered him a job on the spot. He broke down in tears. At first, I thought he was overly ecstatic and was merely happy crying. Odd, but some people are desperate. He kept crying and didn't seem pleased, so I thought maybe the stress level of the interview was high, and he was relief stress crying. Nope. This kid was extremely upset. Apparently, his parents gave him an ultimatum to get a job or leave the house. But working fast food wasn't what he wanted to do for his whole life. He had an interview later that day at some game video store in town. That was his dream job. This seems like it would be no big deal, but after talking to him, consoling him, for 5 minutes I realized he believed that once I offered him the job he was forced to accept and begin working immediately. It seemed like he felt he was supposed to be fine working at a Chick-fil-A for the next 40 years until he retired, and that he had no choice in the matter. I asked if his parents told him he had to accept the first offer, or if they were forcing him to keep a job for a few years for a steady job history. Nope. He just really had no idea that people changed jobs. Both parents only ever talked about working at one place, so he assumed where you got your first job was also where you retired from. This one made me a little sad. Not me, but one of my old bosses. I ended up taking over interviews for this department for a while before I quit. Had a middle-aged gentleman not only show up late because he was riding the bus, okay it happens, but also brought his not super well behaved young kid. My old boss, being super nice, tries to proceed with the interview with a toddler running around the office until the interviewee says, "Hang on, my kid is hungry," produces a bag of Goldfish crackers from his pocket, and then sprinkles them all over the floor for the kid to gobble up like a little animal. Old boss said it took everything in him not to crack up, thanked Goldfish man for his time, and sent him on his way. He didn't get the job. I love this comment so much that I screenshotted it. Thank you. An ex-boxer and drug trafficker I knew came for a job at a factory where I was a supervisor. He openly told me in the interview that he just wanted a job for the appearance and asked if I could tuck him away somewhere easy so he could keep his own hours lol. Girl came in with facial tattoos, one of a spider web on her chin, and a couple of others I couldn't really identify. This was just for a server position. I hired her. She had a good resume and was personable enough. On her third day she just didn't show up. She came in about 2 hours later drunk off her butt and asked why we called in someone else. She called me an butthole and I told her she's no longer employed. She literally came in 2 weeks later with her resume. Like she didn't know she'd been fired. No one told me it was the same girl and I sat down with her. I was surprised as heck and told her she'd been fired before and it wasn't an option to rehire her. She literally did not remember working there for a few days or meeting me or anyone else at the restaurant. It was awkward as frick because she cried for about 5 minutes. About a month later a co-worker said she saw her kinda hard to hide the tattoo, with a sign outside of a freeway asking for money. I still feel bad, but come on, not showing up and being drunk on your third day. The fact that she was probably high and drunk enough during the entire period of her short employment to not remember it at all is what's really impressive. I once interviewed someone who had listed several technologies on her resume that she didn't actually have any experience with. The interview started like this. I look at her resume. Me. So, looks like you have some experience with SVN? Her. No, I don't know what that is. Me. Subversion? She gives me a blank stare. Me. The version control system? Her. I've never heard of it. Me. You have it listed on your resume. Long silence while she just stares at me. It didn't get any better from there. So weird situation. I was the one being interviewed but the woman interviewing me seemed to have never interviewed anyone before. She didn't explain anything about the job or ask me any questions. So I had to ask her about everything and then mention I had experience in that area. She seemed pretty nervous and kept saying I don't know and laughing uncomfortably. I felt like I was interviewing her actually. I got the job though. An applicant for our psychologist position had a decent resume, but required a phone interview as she lived interstate. The phone interview was rife with audio problems. Her answers were interrupted by loud rushing noises that sounded like water, and she seemed distracted. Halfway through the interview, she asked if we could call back later. Turned out she was walking along the beach shore, collecting seashells. As the sun was setting in the horizon, the ocean allegedly looked so beautiful that she felt compelled to stop and take photos. I had one potential candidate actually tell me he was too high to answer the question. I had one poor girl's mother interrupt the interview to ask, "Is this going to take much longer? I have somewhere I'd like to be." Interviewed a guy in his mid-50s for a job and he proceeded to tell me how he got fired for punching his last boss in the mouth within the first 30 seconds of the interview. I was a supervisor at a casino and did all the hiring for the Cajun Bank. Candidate looked good on paper. I explained our drug policy and how certain things in one's background were an automatic no. I explained that the gaming commission would be doing a background check and her employment was provisional to their okay. Got to the end of the interview, she leaned and so, "Y'all don't check for coke, do you?" "Yes, but Pepsi is okay." I'm not an employer, but I've talked with my previous manager on some of his interview experiences. He's had numerous candidates who when asked why they're interested in the job say they don't want to be cooped up inside all day at a desk. The job is in financial services, at a desk, indoors, all day. He's also talked about people who talk about how they didn't list their previous employers as references because they'd have absolutely nothing good to say about them. We used to ask a math question as part of the beginning of our interviews. It was always something relatively simple like, what is 60% of 300? We asked this exact question to a candidate, and she paused. No, a pause lasts for a few seconds. She stopped. A minute went by, and then another passed. After a while, I told her that it didn't matter and that she could just guess. She declined. No, declining would imply that she said anything at all. Instead, she stared down at her fingers for another 4 minutes. At this point, my peer and myself are on the verge of laughing. I'm not exaggerating. It was actually around 7 minutes that felt like an eternity. When I was digging my nails into my thigh so that I would not smile, she looked up. She stared me straight in the eyes and said, $57. Never once was this a question about money. No, I just did the math, it's definitely $57. Not an employer, but a girl came in for an interview at my work barefoot. She had a blouse and crap but no shoes. She also did some weird things. She works there now, and before any of you ask, she wears shoes. I wasn't the employer in this convo, but I was the lead sergeant supervisor, so I participated in the interview. The company was an ISP computer sales shop, and the job was for a junior system admin tech support PC builder. When we asked if he had any questions, the only thing he wanted to know was if he could surf P in the office after hours. Frequently asked questions from past times I've told this story. Our manager said yes, as long as he used an office without a window and the front door was locked. We hired him. We later fired him. Not P related. 1. Holy crap. 2. Holy crap. 3. Holy crap. I was the one being interviewed in this scenario. To this day, I honestly couldn't tell you what happened, but for some reason I answered every single question he asked me with I don't know. Why did my brain freeze up like this? I really don't know. Nothing like having all the answers mapped out in your head and then forgetting literally everything during the interview, except fine dining and breathing. When I was working at a warehouse as a manager, someone came into an interview I was performing falling down drunk. Literally couldn't string more than a few words together without slurring. Reeked of alcohol, the works. He was applying to be a truck driver. Needless to say, I didn't hire him. My manager was recently supposed to interview a 16-year-old for a position at our store, but he did not show up. Instead, his mom came in for him. Worst part was she had to hire him as he was a recommendation from our owner. Please tell me you're kidding. I never scheduled an interview for this candidate, but I had a man come in to call the store multiple times over the course of 2 or 3 weeks. He was asking about a job for his wife. He said she was available 2 specific days of the week, for a specific 4-hour time span each day. Not really the availability we're looking for. I told him multiple times, as nicely as possible, that we do not hire candidates with such limited availability and that I would be happy to discuss his wife's application with her if she contacted me. When he would come into the store, his wife would be with him, but never said anything. He eventually mentioned that she doesn't speak English at all. I had to tell him that I can't hire someone who can't communicate with any of our employees or customers. I had a similar issue with one of my students constantly trying to get me to hire his mom as an assistant. I know learning English is hard, but if you can't communicate with anyone, you're useless to the organization. I have to say, the girl who admitted to leaving Paneras because it was too fast-paced did not think it through when she applied to my Starbucks store. I was the interviewee. I was applying for a city government job that I wasn't fully qualified for. I knew this, but I knew the head of the department, so that got me the in. I also took the initiative to pre-take several qualifying exams etc. and get myself certified in some areas of the job. So, with my bit of nepotism and initiative, I managed to make it to the final round of interviews. It was down to 2 people. I expected another get-to-know-you interview type interview that I always do well with because I'm fairly personable and put off a trusting vibe. Well, this interview wasn't like that. First surprise was seeing the number of people waiting to interview me. The mayor, fire chief, police chief, and heads of all the other major departments were there. Next surprise came when they started taking turns asking very technical questions involving many different areas of expertise. I could only answer about 1 out of every 10 questions. The interview lasted for 2 hours. I still wish after 10 minutes I had just politely acknowledged what we all knew, that I was unqualified, and apologize for wasting their time. At least then I could have saved some face. I still get embarrassed thinking about this today, well over a decade later. I had a smaller scale example of this when I worked in a union. Applied for a networking, computer job and was surprised to get an interview. My boss came clean. Well, you're in the union. I should have bowed out but thought it would be good experience. They were really nice about it and cut it a bit short. I can slightly relate to the feeling though. So cringy. Apparently it's not unheard of that kids in their early 20s bring their parents in on job interviews. I'd be embarrassed to ever admit I did that. That straight up screams I'm not ready to be accountable to myself. I have to have constant supervision. Me being interviewed. Employee. So, do you have any experience doing very large commercial events? Me. No, I don't. I'm sorry, I don't believe it said anything about that in the job ad. Employee. No, it didn't. Me. I don't have that kind of experience. I have experience in mid-level commercial events. Employee. Yeah, that's not going to do. Me. So why didn't it say? We could have skipped this part. Employee. We're currently trying to figure out what the position takes. I basically need someone to take over my job as I'll be leaving in some months. Me. So you do the large commercial events now? Employee. Number. Me. Completely giving up. Now watching my cup of tea cool down. Few months later, I'm employed somewhere else. Past that place. Office closed. Business shut down. I own a small business that does mobile car detailing. No more than a month ago we had interviews to hire 2 employees. One of the potential guy came in and was relaxed. When asked about one of his qualities he said, well, I get up in the morning, and when asked what his favorite car was he said, I dunno. Pickups. When I asked if he had a specific brand in mind he responded, yeah, black pickups. It's no surprise we didn't hire him. Man, that's a tough question to ask in an interview. It takes months of soul searching to come up with an answer. I was regrettably a McDonald's manager for a few years. We were short staffed, so to cover a worker's break, I was on a register. While taking a customer's order, a young man approached us, walked straight up to the counter and attempted to wedge himself between the customer and me. I'm here for an interview. Not only had he made an uncomfortable and rude intrusion on a customer, he was wearing a white undershirt, wife beater as it's called here, with pants slung below his butt cheeks and boxers hanging out. My response was, no, you're not. I was one of a series of interviewers for a development position. I gave a standard fizz buzz question as a soft opener just to make sure the person knows how to do the bare minimum that would be required for the job. Plus, starting with softball questions tends to make the candidates happier and more confident. I had one guy who immediately after I asked the question said, oh god, I'm not good at recursion. Then clenched his chest and had a full-blown panic attack. After I calmed him down we spent the remainder of the interview talking about hobbies and soft animals. He did not get an offer. I love tiny bunnies. Interviewed a guy for a technical writing position. He submitted a writing sample of a story he wrote about an office worker who kills all his co-workers. I used to do phone interviews before face-to-face interviews and had a few odd moments. I've had several parents want to answer the questions on behalf of their child. A few frick off as they assumed I was cold calling. Around 20% didn't speak a word of English, which was no good as it was customer facing. One woman wouldn't let me speak, she just repeated the words, I got job, I come in now. She turned up, it took 20 minutes to get her to understand it was only a job interview, not an actual job. I got job, I come in now. I was probably that person. I should mention I'm autistic, so when I'm anxious I can completely lose the ability to speak or even think. My internal monologue basically turns into TV static. In this case, I had a phone interview with the Department of Agriculture for an internship. They asked me to name 5 farm animals, probably as an easy throwaway question. I completely blanked and it took me about 5 minutes of awkward silence to remember the existence of cows. Same thing when they asked me about plants. I didn't get the job. A lady who previously worked for Disney was interviewed for an hour manager position at a place I used to work. She talked about everything you shouldn't, like family, mental health problems, and physical limitations. To get her back on track, one of the interviewers asked what was the best part of working for Disney. She answered, a magic. My co-workers walked out laughing so hard they were in tears at how badly the whole thing had gone. My friend John isn't on Reddit, so I'll take his story. John's interviewing a guy, Dave, for a tech support job and asks what interests him about the certification he's studying for. Dave doesn't know. John asks what was the topic of the last class session Dave attended. Then, and Dave goes off about how he doesn't need the class and already knows everything. John wants to know if Dave has any customer relations skills at all. Spoiler, no. And asks about some stories from Dave's current job driving for Libba. Dave explains that human brains are wired to only remember negative experiences. Sounds like Dave is very smart and likely watches Rick and Morty. He was clearly a good pick for the job. I interviewed a guy a few years older than me for a pretty much entry-level sales role. Can't remember everything unfortunately, but this guy thought he was the best thing since sliced bread and obviously expected the job on the spot. Turned him down for someone with no experience as he wouldn't have been good chemistry wise, and I didn't rate him anyway. He emailed me later that day basically having a tantrum that he didn't get the job, saying that he was obviously the best candidate and the reason he didn't get the job was my lack of management skill and judgment. It then went on to rip me apart and build him up and still loosely ask for the job. Forwarded his email along with his CV to other local managers I was close to and my boss. It was a Friday and was met with hilarity and amusement. What a clown. Advice for getting a job: don't be like this guy. All he did was confirm to your boss that you have good judgment. Motion picture property master. Interviewed someone relatively new in town to be my on-set assistant prop master, a position sometimes credited as standby props. He boasted that he had been the standby propman for a big sci-fi feature with a $100 plus M budget that had come to town the year previous. I asked him who his prop master had been. He gave me a name I recognized as someone from another city who occasionally came to do cheap TV movies when things were slow on his own patch, but who had never done features. I then informed the applicant that I had actually been the property master on that sci-fi feature, and that as he and I had never met, it was unlikely that he had been the standby prop man. Then I invited him to leave my office, and to make sure I never, ever saw his face again. So I guess that would qualify as his most awkward interview, if not exactly mine. Postscript. Later, I spoke to my actual assistant on that feature. He recalled the name, and indicated he had been dispatched by the union when we requested a few extra hands for a week. But he had proven so inept and clueless that he had been dismissed early on his second day. Clearly, he hadn't learned much about professional conduct during the intervening year. Don't know if he left the business or not, but I haven't run across him again. From the interviewee side, I once had a 45-minute interview with two employers. We weren't sat at a table, it was just 3 desk chairs arranged in a kind of circle. When I was sitting at the bus stop afterwards, I realized my fly was undone the whole time. Miraculously they still offered me a job though. I guess they just really liked what they saw. A seemingly normal lady in her late 40s mentioned she lived with her parents and that they discussed the position and said it was okay for her to go to the interview. Went from being the most promising candidate to being the weirdest. Could have easily been someone with Asperger's. I manage a retail store and we have an online system that tracks applicants that apply through our website. One lady applied and I immediately recognized her name. 2 weeks previous she had been utterly awful to my 20-year-old coworker. My employee was the sweetest person and trying hard to fix her problem, and all this woman did was make nasty and mean comments. I came over after another employee came to get me to deal with the situation and she yelled at me for how awful my employee and I were and how she hated our store. I politely asked her to leave and told her that I had fixed the issue she had. She didn't care and swore at us on her way out. I figured, this lady's name isn't terribly original, so it has to be a different lady with the same name. Nope. She walks in, shakes my hand, talks about how great she is with people and all of her many accomplishments for 20-30 minutes. It took everything within me not to laugh the entire time I was there. TLDR. Lady came in and yelled and cussed at me and my employees. Interviewed her 2 weeks later assuming it was someone else with the same generic name. It was not. She was not hired. Retired cop here. We had one young 21-year-old kid who just finished the academy, and on his first day of field training he was interviewing a 20-year-old hot girl who had sex with a minor boy. While she was giving the details of a sex act they did, he freaking passes out. Turns out he was raised in a very strict Mormon family and was very sheltered. He never even kissed a girl and was super nervous hearing a hot chick tell him how a kid 6 years his younger put it in her butt. He was let go a few days later. He was oddly naive to the real world and not street smart. He would have been killed out there. Interviewed a guy for a first line IT role. First question was just a casual get to know you question. Me. What interests you about a career in IT? Guy. I like making folders. Moving files about. You know. Making folders. Moving them. Dang, that was a short interview. I had one interviewee once who kept farting throughout the interview. Audibly. Kept lifting a cheek. Didn't say excuse me or acknowledge them at all. Just would lift a cheek. Let it rip while talking. It was a small interview room and it got pretty funky by the end. Has anyone else ever had the interviewee turn the whole thing around and start interviewing you back? I'm a young-ish manager in publishing and the most bizarre interview I had was with an older woman who had applied for a role. No problem there at all. On paper, I was keen to use her experience in my team, but during the interview she seemed thrown by the fact I was younger, along with a similar age HR manager, and gradually turned the interview around until she was asking all the questions. It started by her replying to our questions with more questions about the company, work environment, job role, etc. Can kind of see the sense in that, as it is a two-way process. But she also asked me about my background, my previous jobs, and I started to answer but was like, hang on a minute. After about 15 minutes the dynamic was completely the wrong way round. It felt like she was interviewing me, considering she knew I was going to be her line manager if she got the job. I have no idea why she went for this tactic. Incidentally, when we didn't offer her the job, she was the only candidate to ask for detailed feedback on why. She actually threatened to file a complaint for not getting the job. Luckily I had the HR manager there too who agreed it had been a truly bizarre interview and there's just no way she would have happily worked under me. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.